I oftentimes compare what we do to a Sherlock Holmes story. If you've ever read Sherlock Holmes, the client comes in and they're distraught and he says, "Tell me about what's going on and what happened." And he would listen very intently. And then when the story was over, he'd say, "Okay, come back in a week. Let me go out and do some investigation. Let's look for clues and see if we can solve this mystery." And so we do that with our patients. When people ask me, "Well, what's Wichita like if I'm going around the world?" And I'll say, "Well, to me, it's like a really friendly, big, small town."
I'm going to Wichita. I'm just a boy from Kansas.
Mama said to run with the law, but I'm from Wichita.
Welcome back to another episode of the Wichita Life Podcast. My name's Landon. Fall is in the air, the weather is finally cooling off in Wichita, and Il Primo has their seasonal drinks. Stop by Il Primo Espresso Cafe today and try the Apple Crisp Latte, the Witch's Brew Mocha, or the Jack O Latte. Drink local coffee. Today's guest is Dr. Ron with the Riordan Clinic. Dr. Ron has been at the clinic for 34 years. The Riordan Clinic was started in 1975 to study and treat cancer and complex chronic illness. We talk about Dr. Ron's experience, what the Riordan Clinic does, nutrient deficiency, and much more. Enjoy my conversation with Dr. Ron. All right, I'm here with Dr. Ron. How are you doing, doctor?
Good, Landon.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a family physician I'm a native of Kansas, and I've lived my whole life here in Kansas. Early on, I got interested in health and wellness and good nutrition and exercise. I've done a couple marathons.
Nice.
I was lucky after I got out of medical school. I went through family medicine and got into a family practice that wellness was one of their cornerstones. It was called Well Plan at Salina Family Physicians. And we did a lot with nutrition. We helped people learn the importance of exercise, stress management, the concept of being more responsible for your own health. And then from there, that was the foundation. And I began, one of my jobs there in Salina was taking care of, I didn't take care of him, but I was the medical director of a large retirement center.
Okay.
And there was a clear-cut pattern to me that as people got older, if the doctor didn't have enough time or if they were mostly wanting to make a diagnosis, they would either adjust their meds or start meds. But the tendency was to build up medications, and some of these more elderly people would be on 12 to 15 meds. And I often thought, now wait a minute, we're not getting to the root cause of why they're not well. And part of that is that if you don't take care of yourself, you'll start to develop complex chronic illnesses. So then I ran into Dr. Riordan, who started out as a psychiatrist. And he was working, obviously, psychiatric illnesses are quite complex, but he was a friend of two psychiatrists, Abram Hoffer and a doctor in New Jersey, the Carl Pfeiffer Foundation, both of whom were looking to see if there were nutritional factors that could be measured. And then once you determined that person had a low this or that, start filling in that gap and seeing whether or not it would help resolve some of the chronic illness. And sure enough, it was very beneficial. And so when I found out about this was my next big step, was to join Dr. Riordan. And so for the last 34 years, I've been working with patients with difficult illnesses, looking for the epigenetic, the behavioral, lifestyle factors, nutritional factors, hormonal imbalances, toxicity issues that could help them actually correct the root causes and get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that was a lot to unpack there. I'm excited. I'm excited to get into it. Thank you for kicking it off like that.
Sure.
I think that's something I often hear too, is like at most doctors, not their fault necessarily, just kind of the way the system is set up, is they see somebody every 5 to 7 minutes or something like that. And so, the best thing they can do really is just prescribe the next drug down the list and try to take care of the symptom rather than the root cause.
They're a product of their education, and doctors are trained to make diagnosis. We come out of an era where antibiotics were kind of a huge change. Medicine for a long time, people didn't think doctors were very powerful, but with the advent of the antibiotic era, we got rid of a lot of serious problems. And I always tell people, our trauma care, for instance, if I'm in a car wreck, don't bring me to the Riordan Clinic. I want to go to a top-notch emergency room, and they do an amazing job.
Sure.
That's acute care, and our acute care model is fantastic. But what we have evolving in the United States, and it's really happening in all of the major countries, is that complex chronic illness is now becoming the dominant factor that patients are showing up to see their doctor for, and the system is geared towards one problem. Here's your treatment, and you're done. And what we find is that most of these complex illnesses, there's multiple underpinnings as to why they are remaining ill, and just taking a medicine for a symptom is not going to solve the problem.
So you mentioned part of that is from kind of their education and schooling. Is there any change in the education med school system to like point more holistically or anything like that?
Well, I think it's we have a son who's also a physician. He also graduated from KU Med School. We were comparing notes, and I told him, one afternoon when I was a sophomore in medical school, we had an hour and a half discussion of nutrient deficiency diseases. That was it.
Wow.
He says, I think I had that same class, and that was it. It's just not part of the. The thing about nutrition is it's complex. You can't have a 5-minute conversation about nutritional factors, and it's not just nutrition. Now we're getting into the environmental factors, toxicologic factors, stress, sleep disorders, psychiatric issues or overload problems. All that can play into a chronic illness. So a chronic illness doesn't have just one cause. It has many roots.
Sure. I'll have my brother call you after he gets through a little more med school. He just started at KU Med. So I'll let him talk to you about that and see if it's changed.
Well, I don't want to put down, the doctors themselves have a lot to deal with, and it's amazing the amount of work and training they have to go, that they need to have just to do the type of medicine that's available now. But it's not keeping up with the changes in the types of chronic illnesses that people have. Or they just, like you say, they just don't have the time to do it in order to get through a busy day.
Yeah. So I want to get more into the nutrient stuff just here in a minute, but I had a couple of facts about the Riordan Clinic in general I wanted to kind of talk about. So the Riordan Clinic in Wichita is on 92 acres of nature preserve. Has it always been here, or has it moved to here?
1985 is when Dr. Riordan, when they purchased this lot. He started out as a laboratory at his office near downtown, and so 1985 is when they started to build the structure, and I think it was 87 that it opened.
Okay. And do you have any idea what the inspiration for it was? I know there's been all kinds of guesses as to what the little bubbles or the pyramid
Sure. He was Dr. Riordan was a fan of Buckminster Fuller, who was a futurist and brilliant guy, and he invented the geodesic dome.
Oh, very cool.
And so Dr. Riordan wanted something that people would know it wasn't just the same type of medicine that they normally had been seeing. He also liked the fact that it was very modernistic, and the pyramid, which one of the board members wanted to have built, represents ancient thinking. So modern and ancient thinking brought together in one place.
I love that. That's so cool. A couple other facts. You've served patients from all 50 states and more than 50 countries at either the Wichita Hayes or Overland Park location, Riordan as a whole. It's a 501c3 nonprofit org. And then just kind of a one-liner is it's a world-renowned academic medical center that has led the world in integrative oncology, which I had to look up, but the study of cancer oncology for people that don't know that.
Right.
And complex chronic illness, as you mentioned, since 1975. And then one of the foundational pillars is your mission of education. So you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the things I liked right off the bat, Dr. Riordan did not refer to patients as patients. He said patients are co-learners. And the idea there is that because complex illness is complex, you need to involve the patient in the discovery process. I oftentimes compare what we do to a Sherlock Holmes story. You know, if you've ever read Sherlock Holmes, the client comes in and they're distraught and he says, tell me about what's going on and what happened. And he would listen very intently. And then when the story was over, he'd say, okay, come back in a week. Let me go out and do some investigation. Let's look for clues and see if we can solve this mystery. And so we do that with our patients. We take a good 60 to 90 minute intake. We do very thorough nutrient testing, hormonal testing, toxicity tests. We've even gotten into something called methylation imbalances that can cause a lot of problems, so that when they come back, we have a lot of data on their biochemistry, and then we use that in combination with their story and put that together and create pathways to better health involving lifestyle changes, dietary changes, supplements, hormones, natural ways to help the body function better.
Right. So what are some of those kind of, I guess, common, so it's chronic, so everyone's unique, obviously, but what are the common nutrient deficiencies or hormonal issues? Is there like specific, like they're short on iron or something?
Right. Well, the Riordan Clinic is known worldwide for the research that we did on the use of high-dose vitamin C in cancer care, but you can also use high-dose vitamin C for infections, acute infections, chronic infections. It also works as a stress reliever because it'll boost adrenal functioning. Vitamin C is a detoxifier. So, but the cancer research that we did, Dr. Riordan was a very good friend of Dr. Linus Pauling, who was a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry and peace. But he was one of the first scientists to really look at giving high doses of vitamin C intravenously as a treatment for cancer care.
Wow. So are most people, I mean, obviously you can get vitamin C in fruit and other things. Are a lot of people deficient? And is it possible to get, I mean, obviously those are extreme cases, but like to get enough vitamin C through food, or is it necessary to kind of go that route?
Well, again, with cancer or more acute, serious illnesses, that's where the higher doses are going to work better. Most creatures make their own vitamin C. You know, a good example that I use to explain why we do use higher doses of vitamin C. A goat can make 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C per day if it's healthy. But if it's sick or injured or there's some kind of trauma, it will generate up to 12,000 a day. It can go up that much. So, and in nature, most creatures can do that. They can generate more vitamin C when they're threatened. We humans can't. And so the recommended daily allowance is around 100 milligrams per day. That's given the fact that everything's fine, you're eating well, there's no toxicity, there's no stress. Do you know anyone that fits that? I mean, we're all stressed these days. People, the food supply that we have, you have to really be careful about what you're eating. The food is not as much whole foods as it used to be. And then there's some serious infections out there, viruses and whatnot. And so having extra vitamin C on board is like an insurance policy, a nutritional insurance policy to first help you prevent getting sick. And then second, if you do get sick, it can work as a wonderful way to boost your immune system, to detox your body, to help your immune system fight cancer cells. So it's not vitamin C per se, it's just how the body uses it to take better care of itself.
Sure. So you said 100 milligrams is like, if you're
recommended daily allowance.
Right. So what is high dose? Like how high is high dose?
So we like our patients, if they're interested, number one, I like them to test their own urine. And to start out with a dose, maybe 500 milligrams twice a day, but test their urine. We have little test strips. This is, again, the whole notion that if you monitor, use information about your body, you're going to be more able to customize the dose that's best for you. So they can test their urine several times during the day and then find out what dose of vitamin C is going to work the best for them. And if they're really stressed, if they're really sick, they may need 10 grams of vitamin C a day.
Wow.
But if they're pretty healthy, they may be fine with just getting it from their food.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So is that controversial, like in the medical community, doing that high of a dose, or what is that kind of, how do other people view that?
Yeah. So yes, in the medical, the medical model is just eat a balanced diet. Just eat a balanced diet, and maybe you can take a multivitamin and you'll be okay. But the medical model does not generally measure nutrient levels. And so that was the big difference in functional medicine and conventional medicine is that functional medicine, we do look at individuals as unique, and their genetics may depend on more of a certain nutrient than the average person. So we don't look at people as being average. We try to use our lab to characterize the uniqueness of their biochemistry and then treat that rather than giving them we don't really use a lot of multiple vitamins. We tend to use more strategic vitamins based upon their conditions and their symptoms and what their body seems to need when we get the test results back.
Sure. So would you recommend the average person, maybe healthy or relatively healthy, do blood work on a regular basis, and what would that regular basis be?
So the standard medical office does not provide nutrient testing because it's just really not in the thought process. So we have a check your health fair twice a year where we offer discounted nutrient testing, and this last year we had almost 100 people do profiles.
That's awesome.
And then some of them were patients, some of them weren't. And they can just come out here and do a profile, and then we have them. That profile includes a visit with one of our practitioners to go over their results, hear what's going on in their lives, and kind of correlate how their nutrient levels may relate to life stresses or symptoms that they're having, difficulty sleeping, wounds don't heal very well, they have a chronic runny nose. We can use that information to help them design a nutritional profile that's customized to them.
That's very interesting. Outside of vitamin C, is there the next most popular nutrient that you kind of look at?
In my book would be vitamin D, and magnesium's a real close up there with at number 3. Yeah, vitamin D, so we've become an indoor culture. We don't get sunshine anymore. Or if we're out, we've been kind of taught that the sun is the enemy and we have to slather on a lot of sunscreen. And now, granted, you can get too much and you can get sunburns, and that can be harmful. But if you use the sun sensibly and you measure your vitamin D levels, see, once again, measure. If you measure your D levels, you can safely supplement your D or use sunshine and some degree of supplementation to get into a more optimal vitamin D range.
Gotcha. And is that blood work, P-strip? What's the best way to test that?
That's a blood work.
Do that at home?
Well, there's a lot of little labs that are popping up around the city and around the country where you can go in and test yourself. That's an easy one to test. It's a small little blood test. Okay. And so I think I was on a board up in Canada for 12 years where they did over 45 studies just on vitamin D, and that was kind of like their primary nutrient that they were focusing on, because up in Canada you're further north. Right. And so they had many different conferences on the benefits of vitamin D, and I'm pretty much sold on vitamin D being it's really not a vitamin, it's like a hormone. And we normally would make it because we'd be out in the sun. But most people, we've become an indoor culture, and we just don't get the sun like we used to.
Right. I feel like I've heard more about, I feel like growing up, it was vitamin C was kind of what I always heard about. And the last couple of years, vitamin D.
They're neck and neck right now.
Yeah, and then magnesium, though. I don't know if I ever hear about magnesium.
Yeah, magnesium. Dr. Tom Levy, who's one of our board members and a really good friend, he's written 13 books on nutrition. When he wrote the book on magnesium, he's written about 3 books on vitamin C alone. He's kind of known to be a vitamin C expert. After he finished his magnesium book, he told me kind of sheepishly, I'm beginning to think magnesium's more important than vitamin C, because there are over 5,000 enzyme systems in the body that require magnesium as a cofactor. So it's huge.
Is there a daily recommended, or what you guys would recommend daily for a normal person?
Well, it depends. Once again, what's your stress level? What kind of symptoms are you having? There's not an easy way to test it like the P-strip that you can do with vitamin C. And there's 8 different types of magnesium, so you have to be a little bit more specific about what you're doing. A lot of people will take magnesium if they're having heart palpitations or blood pressure problems. It's a relaxer. It helps people sleep better. It's very good for the heart. It can help improve bowel function if people have constipation, for instance. A number of different things about magnesium.
Okay. I want to talk about a couple other things. So you mentioned a lot of it is oncology or cancer. What are some of the other I guess specialties that you guys specialize in?
So we do see quite a few people that have either high blood pressure or they have heart disease, and so we'll do various things to look for heavy metal toxicity, or once again, just key nutrient deficiencies can be a factor. Vitamin D deficiency is a biggie in terms of heart disease as well as cancer. So we work a lot with heart disease patients. We work with autoimmune disease quite a bit. People who have psychological problems. Very often we find that it's not just a psychological problem. It's a nutrition problem. It's a sleep problem. It's a stress problem. Right. And so we use the lab to help customize treatment plans for them. A lot of arthritis patients. We have a lot of arthritis patients, and we have a specialist up in Hayes who does something called prolotherapy, where we can inject various substances that are natural into the joints as a way of rehabilitating and improving joint functioning.
Wow, you guys cover a lot.
Yeah.
So what would be the first step a potential patient would expect if they were to come to Riordan Clinic?
Well, I encourage people to listen to our podcast. That gives them a pretty good idea of what we're thinking, what we're doing with patients.
And that's the Real Health Podcast.
That's the Real Health Podcast. Yep. We've got a lot of YouTube videos that they can watch. We've got an incredible library of videos here. You can go online to the riordanclinic.org, and a lot of the videos are online, and the podcasts are there as well. There's a whole series of Health Hunters, it goes back, I think, 34 years of a monthly newsletter that we've put out. A lot of very good articles there, and most of those are on the website. It's got a huge back library of those newsletters.
Perfect, and I'll be sure to share those links so people can find those easily. So at what point in a patient's treatment should they consider adding the services you guys provide?
Well, most of the people come here because they just did feel like they got enough. We encourage the patients to go to their primary care doctor first, or go to the specialist first. Get the best of what modern medicine has to offer. But if they're not getting the results that they want, and they want to look in a little bit different way, looking more at the functional aspects of the illness, we can provide that kind of an evaluation for them.
Absolutely. What recent success stories do you have? Obviously, leave the names out and everything like that, but what's a recent success story you can kind of...
Well, the lady that I just saw just before I came over here, I've been seeing her for probably about 7 or 8 years. She's diabetic, and her triglycerides now are less than 100, which is unheard of. And so she's got really good triglyceride levels. She was talking about how she's sleeping so much better. We found out that her support for sleeping, the CPAP machine was just not doing the job. And in talking with her, she had dry mouth in the morning. So I had her get it's called a Somnifix. It's a piece of mouth tape to keep the mouth closed all night long. She's sleeping fine without the machine. Yeah. So, and she's exercising more. She's watching her diet. So part of what we do is encourage people to get involved, become an active co-learner, and read articles on this, try things. Your health is really your responsibility. We can be an advisor, kind of like a coach, but you've got to go out there and play the game. And so she's someone that I'm very thrilled about, and she was thrilled about being a successful co-learner, because in the early days she said, well, I'm on this medicine and that medicine, but I don't know, I just don't feel good, I'm tired. She's got much more zest and enthusiasm now because she's taken responsibility for her health.
Right. And she's probably been able to shed a lot of those medicines, and that's awesome.
She's reduced a number of them.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't necessarily tell people to go off their medicines, but oftentimes they can fine tune them a little bit better if they're feeling better.
Absolutely. So we just touched on a lot of it, and I love the idea of the co-learner aspect of everything. But what's one thing, I guess, besides kind of the podcast and YouTube and stuff, that listeners can do to take a step towards living a healthier life?
Well, first of all, understand that they are the person who's most responsible for their health. And this idea that I'm going to just do what I want to do, and then when I get sick, I'll run in and someone will kind of rescue me. Those days are becoming numbered, because most of the illness, let's just take the number one illness in the world right now, is what's called the metabolic syndrome. Because of the type of fats that are in our diet, because of all the sugars that's in the diet, the people are gradually putting on weight. There are now like almost half the population has a weight problem. And if you look underneath that, they have a blood sugar problem. And if you look underneath that, their blood pressure is starting to go up. And then they're tired, and then they're not sleeping very well. And then pretty soon they're going to have, maybe they'll have something like arthritis that'll show up in inflammatory or autoimmune problems. These problems just start to accumulate as they roll down the road. And there aren't pills for this. There's no metabolic syndrome pill that works. So now, if you get diabetic or hypertensive, there's pills for that. But what about the root causes? That's where you have to get back to self-responsibility and testing so you can see what's the best road to take in terms of making changes in this area.
Sure. I have a couple kind of questions I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, but before we get to that, are there any other takeaways or messages that you would want to kind of relay to the public?
Well, just that the longer I do this, the more enthusiastic I get, and I wish people would get enthusiastic about their health, because it's not until you start losing your health that you realize how incredibly important it is. Mm-hmm. So start today thinking about it and becoming responsible and enthused. As your number one cheerleader is you. If you're not interested, ain't nothing going to happen.
Sounds right. So I like to ask some questions specific to Wichita. This is the Wichita Life podcast. So what is your favorite part about Wichita, or what's a hidden gem in Wichita?
Well, I had one patient tell me, he was from Texas. He says, I can't believe how you don't have traffic jams down here. It gets a little busy during rush hour, but overall we drive pretty freely. Mm-hmm. And so I like that. But I like the culture here. We have a lot of really good culture. We have a lot of entrepreneurialism here. As a matter of fact, I don't think this place would. But as a matter of fact, people ask me that. How did the domes in the pyramid get started on the plains of Kansas? As if we were like Hicks. But I think there is a lot of discovery. People want to learn how to do better with their lives and make their businesses better and be healthier and find ways to improve on how people get along and work together better. So I have that sense of creativity and growth in the spirit of Wichita, Kansas. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with all of that. Is there anything you wish Wichita had that it doesn't, or what would you improve about Wichita?
Oh, man. Boy, I can't think of a lot of things. Is that a good answer?
That's a great answer. I think something that always comes to my head is my brother and sister-in-law moved from Wichita. We all went to high school together. They moved to Minneapolis. And it's like, if not number one, like top 5 fittest kind of cities on the planet. And so even when it's cold out and it's whatever, sub-zero degrees, people are still outside. Like most of the time, it's nice most of the time, but they're just outside, always walking, always doing something. And I think Wichita's getting better at that, but that's something I think I'd like to see, just more and more of that. And
more outdoor type activities. Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of the last question before we kind of ask or see where people can find you, but what does Wichita mean to you?
Well, I'm a native Kansan boy, and I grew up in a small town. I often, when people ask me, well, what's Wichita like if I'm going around the world? And I'll say, well, to me, it's like a really friendly, big, small town. Even though it's a city, it's probably the biggest city in Wichita, it still has, in my mind, the small town characteristics of friendliness and openness to change. Actually, I think that's sometimes small towns are not that open to change. I think Wichita has the friendliness, but it also has that entrepreneurial spirit where people want to grow and learn and be more. And so I think that's my favorite part about Wichita. So I love being here.
Yeah, I think there's a great balance between the size. Yeah, it's not too big, it's not too small, but I agree with everything you just said. So where can people find you, Dr. Ron?
Well, our podcasts, we're doing more and more podcasts these days. That's a good way to get introduced to our philosophy. We have all kinds of YouTube videos that they could watch us on. And I had a guy stop me out on the way here. He says, "Can I take your picture? I've watched so many of your videos." And I encourage people to watch the videos, because that's a good way to really get into the depth of what we're talking about here. We've had to kind of stay on the surface, but there's a lot of depth to nutritional medicine and the nutritional foundation of functional medicine. So, and then they certainly can come see us here. We are trying to get our lecture series started again. I've probably done 400 or 500 lectures over the 34 years that I've been here, and they're all in our library, but we'd like to get them out where people can see them.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I'll make sure to share, all those links, YouTube, the Riordan Clinic link, and the Real Health Podcast. But Dr. Ron, thanks for coming on. This is fun, educational, and
all right, thank you so much.
Glad to be a co-learner. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wichita Life Podcast. Check us out on social media at Wichita Life ICT or our website, wichitalifeict.com. Huge thanks to Jake B. for editing and producing our podcast. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.